Well, we talk a lot about regime change within Iran. There is going to be a regime change in Israel. That's definitely going to happen. What form it looks like is a different matter. It could either be very political, where at the end of this, there is some kind of civil unrest campaign within Israel. There were, like, throughout this whole thing, people talk about how Israel is like the only democracy in the Middle East, but prior to October the 7th, there were protests on the streets because they were doing Netanyahu, to save himself, was doing a regime change within Israel and took out the independence of the judicial and was restructuring the democracy, so that effectively, Netanyahu could save himself from court cases. And throughout this whole thing, there's been a couple of tracks. Like, one is internal within Israel. He's being done for corruption charges. Now, these are the typical things of how, if you've watched the Epstein files, how corruption just really happens in these higher levels of power. But he was and is meant to be, held to account. Now, we know that this is often, leverage, in order to take the political class and the leaders and try and push them in a direction of a corporate interest. And Israel is a militarized economy, with a theological story on top of it in order to radicalize. But it is a jurisdiction that weaponizes religion, like Andrew was covering just as we came in, and the other speaker. It created Israel, created a narrative to radicalize Christians into an extreme version of evangelical Christianity, that made Christians believe that they have to bless the political Israel. And so that was weaponized in order to just really radicalize people into a form of very strange worship of the political ideology that then kind of led to all these crimes against humanity, because at the end of the day, Israel is a militarized, it serves the interests of very powerful military companies, which I'll cover in the market update. Um, but and so it also radicalized Jews into being forced to join the IDF and engage in ethnic cleansing and genocide, more recently. And it also had covert operations to fund and create covert terrorist groups, weaponizing interpretations, of basically taking militarized militia groups and then pretending that it was a religious ideology of Islam. And so you had groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda, that were essentially offshoots of these covert military Western operations that would then receive CIA, Mossad, and MI6 funding. And the Department of Government Efficiency, for example, revealed that in 2024, $695 million of US taxpayer money was funneled via an organization called USAID over to ISIS training camps. And so this is where they control various aspects of media perception through algorithms on social media and then traditional media, where they would just weaponize these three religions in order to radicalize and then do covert operations like 9/11 and various other things, to justify war. And that's what Israel is. It is a jurisdiction that weaponizes religion to manipulate people in thinking that they're doing one thing when they're actually just serving the profits of very wealthy military companies like Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, Raytheon, Boeing, L-based systems, AI, cybersecurity, surveillance, all sorts of technology. And so this is kind of like how it works. But then at the same time, when there was this genocide, there was a new track where the highest court in the world started put together a case that led to a ruling, which is incredibly rare. Obviously, the international courts that came from the United Nations, they were, kind of an imperial organization, because the imperial powers like France, Britain, and America, and now also China and Russia, they get veto votes, and so you can weaponize the United Nations in order to cover up America's crimes against humanity whenever they're doing these covert operations. But for one of the very first time, South Africa actually launched a case and put forward all of the incredibly genocidal quotes that Netanyahu, various other senior finance ministers, were effectively calling for a genocide and using religion in order to, push forward and, kill the children, kill the, was it almanac or something? Sorry, Andrew would say it properly. I'm not too familiar, but
Am,
he used that type.
Amalek.
Amalek, thank you, Andrew. Yeah, Amalek, which is, a story that effectively allowed for the killing of everyone, children, animals, and women, whatever. And that was kind of called upon. So Netanyahu had this second track where he was being done for plausible genocide. And by international law, if Netanyahu lands in your country, he is immediately meant to be arrested. And so, that meant that whenever he's traveling to the White House, he has to go via these countries that are enforcing international law, but he could only route via countries that were just ignoring international law, like America. And so Netanyahu was able to just land at the White House. And so this just completely broke, the world order and international law, which has become a bit of a joke right now, as we're seeing with these attacks on Iran and various other things. Like Iran during the first, retaliation to Israel strikes, about a year ago. They went to United Nations. They filed Article 6. You're meant to do a formal declaration of war. You're meant to describe your actions. And Iran did that, but Israel and America and Britain and Germany and, none of them have followed international law. In fact, they've tore it up. Even this agreement right now, Trump took an agreement between Iran and the United States for sanctions relief based upon nuclear inspections, and said that we're going to ratchet up the sanctions. And throughout the whole time, until very recently, Iran opened up all of its nuclear power plants, and was subjected to independent inspection by U.S. affiliated groups. I think it's called IAEA or something along those lines. And Trump tore that agreement up, agitated this escalation right now by moving, violating international law and international agreements, and moving the American embassy over to Jerusalem in order to exert influence over what was meant to be territory reserved for those that believe the Abrahamic faith, the, Jews, Muslims, Christians, that, the Holy Land is an important land with important buildings for both the Christian faith, for the Jewish faith, and the Muslim faith. And Trump basically relocated that in order to allow Israel to use it in order to expand. And, billionaires all around the world, Zionist billionaires, started investing in purchasing more and more land. So Israel would start funding state terrorists in order to take over. And they're still doing it to this day. It's escalating now. Israel gives guns and weapons and protection to state sponsored terrorists across the West Bank, to steal land, to terrorize Palestinians, to, that you can just get away. You can shoot them, you can take their houses, you can terrorize them. And this is what the Palestinians have had to go through. But because Israel has such a foothold over media, they're able to shape the perception, and because America's partners in crime and they profit from all of these wars, it's a stock market stimulus. It helps US GDP, and so this partnership between these mafia groups, Israel, war profiteers in the US, has led to this situation where we've now had three Americans that have tragically been killed as a result of this. And Trump comes along on TV and says, there's going to be deaths, but we're in an existential threat. An existential threat that you created. You created this whole situation, and we know why. It's not because you're working in agency. It's because you're reliant upon your funding, your lobby funding. Your lobby funding comes from large financial powers that profit from war, technical companies that profit from surveillance, Israeli oligarchs and billionaires that profit from state sponsored terrorism and stealing of land, and those that would agitate strategic tension between Iran and Israel and even push anti Semitism in order to recruit an army in Israel so that they can go and fight wars. And so, using these religions, you've created, you know, fake radicalized is quote unquote Islamist terrorists, which are just paid for hire militia to make Islam look bad. You've radicalized a bunch of evangelical Christians through operations like 9/11. You've radicalized the Jews through Zionism in order to go and recruit an army. And then what do? You mix them all up in a pot and you profit from war. And then once the war is over, you profit from building back better. And so we now got Trump joined the border peace in order to profit from the rebuild. So he's now saying, right, we've created all this war. Now let's put together a border peace and we'll get all the contracts in order to build a surveillance state in Palestine. Elon Musk can get some data centers. I'll get a Trump Tower. The elites within Israel, and then the Gulf countries are saying, right, what do we got to do? From here, we either do what Iran did and we end up risking our country, being destroyed and our people having to go and fight and sacrifice their lives, or we've got to normalize with the terrorists. And so they ended up effectively having to spend billions of dollars to bribe Trump through affinity partners into being able to profit from the rebuild so that you could just so that Trump could exert influence over his lobbies. And then we're having this transitional war right now where there's profiteering from war, there's profiteering from peace, there's profiteering from exploiting religions, there's profiteering from terrorism, there's profiteering from genocide, there's profiteering from ethnic cleansing, there's profiteering from whatever the outcome is. And guess what? They're profiteering from the volatility of the markets too. Why? Because they know when these operations are going to happen. So if they want to destroy the Iranian currency in order to spark a revolution, Scott Bessent goes on CNBC and says, we just destroyed the currency of the Iranian people. Now, the Iranian people log into their online banking. They've lost all their savings. They've lost all their savings. Do you think they're going to be upset when you just created an inflationary cycle? So now you use the media in order to make people think that something is they're about to have a revolution, and you ask a bunch of ordinary citizens to uprise against a militarized government. IRGC is a militarized government because the CIA, MI6, and Mossad has infiltrated their country for decades. British Petroleum stole all their oil, and one day they dared to actually use their oil for the Iranian people. And ever since then, they've been subjected to regime change, overthrow of government, removal of democracy, and replacement with, the Shah that could then steal all the assets and hand it over to US contractors. And that's why we are where we are. The whole thing was manufactured for profiteering. And then you create a whole mafia industry because sanctions destroy the savings of the Iranian people, where the only way that they can sell their oil is put together covert operations and different types of things with China, with Russia. And then guess what? China, Russia invite Iran to join BRICS. And then now you've got de dollarization. And so now you're starting to have an attack on the dollar by financial powers as a result of this. And when you're Iran and you're not allowed to trade with the world, the only partners you can trade with is the mafia, because now you need to work with the Russian mafia or Chinese oligarchs in order to allow those routes to get through, you know. And then the CIA, Mossad, and MI6 and all these different, they work with the mafias. There's a reason why there's drugs in America. There's drugs in America because the CIA, Mossad, and MI6 are selling the drugs. They work with the drug cartels. That's what all that's happening in Mexico right now. They're not trying to stop drugs. They're just re-collaborating who they're working with and how those drugs get in. They're not going to stop the supply side. This is how they fund these covert operations to regime change the world. And now the world is kind of getting together and saying, hold on, this American empire ain't working so well for us. Let's actually use some of the same tools that they used on us, economic warfare and currency warfare. And then they started to partner with the banks, and now the banks are transitioning the world into this new multipolar world order that we're working through. And you know what? The banks are going to make shit tons of money out of that as well. And they're going to go and they're going to hire the US military thinking that they're working in order to save their country. And who are they working for? They're trying to conquer land through the Greater Israel Project so that the banks can have more negotiation power, so that they can get a better deal when they build back Syria and build back Lebanon and profit from the destruction of the building and profit from death, ethnic cleansing, genocidal murder. That's how the dollar works. That's what this system is. And too many people can't put it together because they don't understand the greater macro project. And you were radicalized into believing that you were exporting democracy, saving the world and the civilized race, when you were just fooled and duped. And we learned that from the Epstein files. Now you see the power structures in the world. Now the same military is coming home and saying, let's create civil unrest in Europe. Let's create civil unrest in UK. Let's open up those borders. Let's use our algorithms and media in order to stoke some, getting people angry and racist and religious tensions. And guess what? Then we can come in with Palantir. Then we can come in with the technocratic nightmare. Then we can get you talking on X and we can build your social credit score. Then we can launch a central bank digital currency. Then we can launch our digital currency. That's what's happening, people. Everybody's got to wake up. Your democracies doesn't exist. Your politicians are whores and prostitutes for power. The system is run by the mafia. And now people are wondering, what the hell do I do with all of that? And that's what we're witnessing right now. And the theater of war is purely manufactured. None of these people needed to die. None of it needs to happen. The story you're fed in the media is so cartoonish and bullshit that when you read the Epstein files, you find out how the world really works. And sorry, that was a complete tangent, but this is what we're witnessing. I just can't stand to see another person die because people can't figure out how this system works. And that's what we're having to fight against here. You're being manipulated, you're being lied to constantly, and you think you're working for good, but you're working for evil. And the people in charge of this system are raping our children and bloody weaponizing them and trafficking our children and bloody stealing our children, benefiting from drugs trafficking, human trafficking, weapons trafficking, crimes against humanity, death, rapage, pillage. That's what's propping up the system. That's what's propping up the dollar. That's what the world is trying to re-collaborate at the moment. And that's why economics matters, because this whole thing is about manipulating monetary flows in order to try and get one bucket of money that they're printing and stealing from people through inflation and put it in the hands of a few wealthy people, when 92% of the entire US stock market is controlled by 10% of institutions that are managing your pension, your endowment, your insurance premiums. And BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard at the top, they've got 20,000 board seats of 20,000 companies. And they can manage these wars, they can manage these portfolios, and they can profit from all the volatility to extract more wealth. And that's what they're doing. This is just numbers on a spreadsheet for those psychopathic class that control the lobbies and pay for Donald Trump and pay for Keir Starmer and pay for Macron and pay for Merce to be their prostitutes. Everyone in the UK is asking, what the hell is happening to our country? Why am I an ordinary person in Birmingham? Their grandma's choosing between eating and heating. The person's wondering why the bins aren't even being collected, why the council's no longer being funded, why everyone's looking at all the immigrants that came from all of these wars and wondering what's happening to our country, questioning whether this is racial thing, a religious thing, being stirred up into a frenzy where they end up in some kind of white nationalist movement because they can't figure out what the hell's going on here. And then they weaponize all of that. Meantime, Keir Starmer's telling us $3 billion a year needs to go to Ukraine because we care about democracy. Who's he sponsored by? Lockheed Martin, General Dynamic, BAE Systems. What stocks are going up today? Oil stocks, weapon stocks, innovation for killing people. That's what's going up today. Palantir, BAE Systems. That's what's going up today. Oil stocks that benefit from the price of oil going up, just so while your costs go up, your inflation goes up. It's high scale theft from the average person. And that's the system that is currently creating this war right now. And Netanyahu, using his power, is just trying to negotiate how he doesn't go to prison by international court, doesn't go to prison by Israeli court. And he's using his leverage because he doesn't work for the Jews or the Israeli people. His job, just like Trump's job, is to make you think while they're stealing everything from you, your wealth from you, that this has got something to do with making America great again. It ain't got shit to do with MAGA. It's a narrative that's pushed on top of those that are really pulling the purse strings, manipulating markets, and trying to steal as much wealth from you and make it sound like it's something else. So Netanyahu is going to be regime change, and they're going to replace him with some left, different type of government. You know why? You know why? If we're ever going to get peace in the Middle East, which I believe we are, but it ain't going to be because some guy came along and said, "I really want peace." It's because they haven't got enough money to make from war. They've extracted as much as they can, and now they need a new place to get fast growth. And so they said, you know what? There's not enough growth to be had in America. There's not enough growth in Europe. The stock markets are at all-time high while the standard of living is at all-time low. While people are committing suicide, women are going to OnlyFans to get a career, men are addicted to pornography, birth rates are at the lowest ever, women and men hate each other, family values are at the lowest ever, inflation makes the cost of living something that people can't even figure out. How the hell am I going to buy a house to live in? And people are committing suicide. Suicide rates are at the highest they've been. Affordability, the highest it's, the lowest it's been. Wealth inequality, the asset owners, more concentrated, K-shaped economy, wealth inequality. Like that's the result of this. And so yeah, and that's why we're going to have peace. We're only going to have peace because it's more profitable to have peace because they bribe the right people that are able to actually execute this. And that's the only reason why there's going to be moving to peace. That's what the border peace is. The border peace is how do we make as much money out of peace as possible? And you know what? As sick and as twisted and as unjust as that is, it's better than profiteering from war. So I'll go with the plan. And it's a much better plan. But it's theft of land, it's betrayal of dignity, it's death, destruction. And hey, I'd rather you make money from peace than you make money from war. So we'll go with it. And we'll give you your repackaging to make it sound like you're actually ushering in peace. Because we know you work for greater powers, and we know that the president isn't in charge. We know the prime minister's not in charge. We know all those politicians and left and right bullshit is just a game in order to pit people against people. It's the radical left. It's the Democrats that are causing all this problem. No, it's the far right fascists. No, it's those conservatives. It's those labours. Meanwhile, the same old system, time and time again, tries to buy you into a new ideology to make you think something's going to change when nothing damn changes.